Welcome back to the 1330 WRAM Morning Show. We are joined this hour by Eric Dolbear. He is our team leader for District 6460 with the training team for the Zambia Maize Improvement Project. Eric, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, and thanks for giving us the opportunity.
Yes, had a chance to see you speak at our Rotary Club, our noon Rotary Club here in Monmouth. So had a chance to learn about this project and anxious to tell our audience about it. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about you.
So I'm a farmer. I live near Pleasant Hill, Illinois, which would be about a 3-hour drive south of here, right along the Mississippi River. We farm in the river valley as well as some of the upground, some of the hill land as well. I've been farming really since high school. Had a stint in the ag seed business and then the ag chem business, so I've got some background in industry as well, but have been farming full-time since about, 2003. Had a chance to serve for the USDA over in Iraq, doing some development work there with farmers, and then again later was asked if I would go to Afghanistan, which I did, and so that wrapped up about 10 years ago, and I've been farming since then.
Okay, so the Zambia Africa Project is not your first where you've been able to help farmers in other countries.
That's correct.
Okay, tell us briefly about those two stints and what inspired you to start this Zambia project.
So when I was in Iraq, I was working for the USDA as an ag expert, and basically we were trying to help farmers improve their production. So during that time, our District 6460 Rotary was thinking about developing a vocational training team for agriculture in Africa. And so I was actually contacted while I was overseas to see if I'd have an interest. And I said, yeah, I sure would. Well, that, for one reason or other, just kind of got backburnered for a while. And then sometime later, probably about 2016, so I, in the meantime, had gone to Afghanistan and come back. But in 2016, the idea for having this vocational training team got some legs under it. And so I was contacted again after having expressed interest earlier. And again, I said, yeah, I'd be willing to do that. And so we put a team together and started working on it pretty diligently in 2017, and then made our first trip in 2018. So basically, the idea was presented to me by district leadership. I think them knowing that I had, of course, the farm background, but also some experience doing similar types of work in difficult conditions.
Okay. Well, tell us about Zambia itself. I know from the project that you've been able to show us at Rotary, we learned a lot about how old the soil is in that part of the world.
So, yes, Zambia is sub-Saharan. It's part of what at one time was known as Rhodesia. It's in the southern part of Africa. It's landlocked. Zimbabwe, some people might have heard of that, is just to the south, and then the country South Africa would be just south of that yet. So it's pretty far down in Africa. It's primarily rain-fed, and the soils are ancient. Unlike Illinois, that was glaciated several times, to my knowledge, Zambia has not been. And so the soil is much different than what we would have here. It's completely depleted in some of the nutrients, and the rainfall comes in the period generally from November through April. That's called the rainy season, and then it stops raining and doesn't rain again until that resumes. So they have a rainy period and a dry period. So they have some challenges. They're limited to what the rain will allow, but in some research that I've done, I've found that actually that part of Africa, southeastern Africa, is only producing about 30% of the maize, corn, they call it maize, that they would be capable of with the rain that they receive. So in other words, they're really underproducing quite a lot. So there is opportunity to help those folks do a lot better, even given the limitations that they have.
Okay, so enter the team that you put together. Tell us a little bit about them and how the project got underway.
So one of the team members had actually been selected prior to my coming on board. I was selected as the team leader, and as it turns out, the individual that had expressed interest earlier. John Meese from Jacksonville is a fellow that I'd worked with when we were both in the seed business. So we had worked together a number of years closely, so I knew him quite well. So I was delighted that he was already on the team. And then I selected another team member, Todd Steinacher from the Carrollton area, and he is also an agronomist. And so I was currently working with him. So I had two trained agronomists, both with master's degree, and myself as a farmer. And both John and Todd had ag background, farm background. And so the three of us went over together on that initial trip. And it was a good team. I had two excellent fellows to work with on that.
Okay. And your goal was to go and train farmers in Zambia, in that region. So how do farmers compare? Obviously, from what I've seen from your presentation, we have a lot more opportunities and resources here, but the capability to share those with them.
So the differences are really dramatic. The farmers that we are working with are subsistence level farmers. They might have 1 or 2 acres under cultivation. Some will have more than that. They might have 5 or 6 or even 8 acres that they would have access to, but because of their limited resources, lack of money, and the ability to farm more, they don't. So that's a big limiting factor, and they do have access to inputs. One of the things that we wanted to determine was what is locally available, because we were not going to bring a bunch of stuff over, for them. And so they have access to the things they need: hybrid seed corn, several different fertilizer blends, but they don't have the money, basically, to afford it. And the reason that they don't have the money is that their yields are so low, they barely are producing enough for their own consumption. Now, a few would have a little extra that they can sell, but for example, an acre of corn production there, they might average maybe 30 bushel, let's say 30 to 50. And a really, really good yield in a really good year would be 100 bushels, but that's rare. That would be a target that they might shoot for. So we were tasked with not only just training them, but the goal that was kind of set for us was to help a select group of farmers double their production. And so for non-farmers, it might sound fairly easy, but that's a pretty high hurdle. But we were glad to try to do that. And so that's what we set out to do.
Okay. How did you develop the contacts, and how did you know where to go and what farmers to help learn to cultivate the land in a more efficient manner?
So the Rotary Club of Edwardsville has a connection with the Rotarian in the city of Lusaka, and that connection helped put us in touch. And also there's another Rotarian in Edwardsville Club that runs the Africa Vision of Hope. It's a nonprofit over there, kind of an orphanage and school for children. So with those two contacts, we were able to link up with the extension agent, and actually the extension agent in this district, which is Chongwei. A district would be like a county. He selected 10 farmers for us to work with, and so when we went over on that very first trip in November, we interviewed each of the farmers. We looked at each field. We took soil samples. We wanted to determine what they had to work with. And then we also went to fertilizer dealers to see what fertilizer was available. So that is one thing that I really think makes our project different from other projects, is that we didn't have a preconceived notion of what we were going to do. We didn't want to go plant so many trees or convert so many acres from till to no-till or anything like that. We wanted to assess the situation and determine what needed to be done to help these farmers not only increase but double their yield. So by starting at the very beginning, we examined what was currently the situation. We developed a training program that we thought would work, and we made recommendations for the inputs that should be used. And in that first year, which was the 2018-19 crop, see, they would plant in November and then harvest in June.
Okay.
So for that very first year, we provided the inputs to do as we suggested for 1 acre. and we asked each farmer that participated to use their traditional methods on another acre and compare those two. So we didn't know if our recommendations were going to work, but we did know they were going to be a lot more expensive than what these farmers were used to paying. So that's why we provided the inputs, because we didn't want the farmer to do as we said and then lose, a lot of money because they were taking our advice. So we were kind of testing our program, you might say. So that was in November. I stayed on into December to see the planting season through. Then I came back home, and John Meese, we crossed paths in the airport in South Africa. Then he came over to Zambia, or went over in late December. Then he came home, and then I went back in January, which would have been like during crop scouting period. It might be like, say, May or June here, when you're looking to see about pests, weed control, that sort of thing. And then we went back again, Todd and I, in March to conduct field days. And really it was in March that we were convinced that we were on the right track, because the difference between the traditional fields and our fields was really dramatic. The project fields were just so much better. So we knew that we were teaching the right methods. And so then another team went over in June to collect yield informations, and yield information at that time, it was really dramatic. The project fields yielded 230% of what the traditional fields did. And that is even with one of the so-called traditional fields. One of our growers was so convinced that we were teaching the right thing that he actually did it on all of his acres. So he didn't really have a test field. The only difference was the hybrid that he planted. So even factoring that in, we had an overwhelming advantage. That was a poor production year. It was a dry year. But what that taught us was really what we would have expected. The better methods are better, especially in a bad year. So the message that we tried to get across is that none of us we cannot affect the weather. We cannot control that, but let's control what we can to mitigate the adversity that we might have from bad weather. So that's how that came about. And then in August, I went over and we kind of did a summary. We had a meeting, not just for those 10, but we asked them to invite folks to come in and hear the results. We shared the results with the larger group. And then we offered to do something similar on a reduced input level for the following year if there was interest. And there was overwhelming interest, because neighbors saw what these 10 farmers had done, and they kind of wanted to get involved in that.
And so 3 years later, 10 farmers trained, more farmers, a co-op formed. Tell us the success of the last 3 years. So
we went from 10 the first year to 40. So we added 30 in that second year, and the initial 10 were our mentors. And then at the end of that year, we had a similar kind of wrap-up summary presentation, and there were no longer funds available to offer any kind of free inputs, but we had a meeting and we discussed the advantages and how the project fields did. And again, in that second year, which was a good production year, the yields were still about double what the traditional fields were. So we had 1 year of poor production when the yields were more than double. We had another year of good production when the project fields were double. So we had a pretty good track record going already. So at this second meeting, we invited more farmers. The farmers that were involved invited more farmers to attend. And so we had 70 that attended that session. And we offered to provide a training program. So this would have been in August, and I offered to provide a training program a few days later for those that wanted to receive the training. And there would be no free inputs. It would just simply be training. And so out of the 70 that we basically invited to attend, 70 attended. So everyone came knowing in advance that they would receive no inputs. So we had a growing season then that kind of COVID got involved. And so it curtailed our ability, the training team, to travel over there. I went over twice in 2020, but then COVID restrictions made it just nearly impossible to go. but I had been able to make connections through my connections. I made contact with a young lady who had an ag background, had been a seed salesperson, and she was currently in college but nearly finishing up. And so we hired her to continue on promoting the project. And at that time, she was working just weekends as she was finishing up school. But it was really the timing was great, because there was a 13-month period that none of us from the U.S. were able to go over, but Naomi was there to carry on, as well as the lead farmers who had now become mentor farmers. So they conducted field days without us, and they had success. And so then it would have actually been January of 2021, which was then in the fourth growing season, that I went back, and the crop had been planted. So that was really kind of a crop scouting type of, I guess that would have been the main purpose, but also they had a late planting season. And so this was a new wrinkle, you might say, in the production, a new challenge. And so the message was to not give up on the crop, but continue managing it properly. And so they did, or at least many of them did, and they had a pretty good year. And that also was kind of it was a dry year, so it was a low production year, and yet the project field still did better. They were superior, about that same 2x rate. So we had 2 good years and 2 not so good years, and in every instance, the production for the project field was better.
So the point, of course, is the impact that you and your team are able to have on food insecurity, helping these farmers feed their families, but at the end of the day, have a little left over to take and sell to market too. And what's the old phrase? You can teach. You can something about fish. You can
give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime.
Isn't that what you're really focused on?
Yeah, that's really what it is. And so, we're now to the point where we are in the 5th growing season now. It looks like it's going to be another good year for the farmers participating in the project. And so we're at the point now that we can really expand this. We've got a proven track record. It's working. And so, that's what we're looking to do, to expand this in a fairly big way.
We're talking with Eric Dolbear. He is the team leader, District 6460, for the training team for the Zambia Maize Improvement Project. So you need some assistance in an effort to grow this and continue the process. Tell us what you need.
So what we're going to do is we would like this to become sustainable, so that down the road the Zambians can run this themselves without outside input and funding. But this is pure development, and so it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight or even in 2 or 3 years. The way that we see that this can be done is to help these farmers to develop a successful cooperative business. They actually formed a co-op, because I let the farmers know that I was working with the lead farmers, that if we were ever going to be able to provide mechanization, which is one of the real limiting factors, then it would have to be cooperatively owned, because we're not going to, give every farmer that has 1 or 2 acres a tractor. So they formed the co-op, and they formed it in such a way that the co-op could also be an input supplier, like fertilizer, seed corn, and also livestock production. So this co-op was formed and registered with the Zambian federal government to do all of those things. And so what we intend to do is to help this co-op develop the business that would include agronomic training. It would include input supply, equipment rental, which we actually started this past year, that the co-op will own equipment and then rent this out to co-op members, and then chicken production, broiler production. So helping the co-op develop this business, over time the business will become profitable, and the profits will sustain the agronomic training, so this can be expanded out into the future. So we're going to increase the number that we train as we go through this 5-year period, but also building the business that the co-op runs so that it will have the profits to sustain it even beyond that.
Okay. And the grant funding that was a part of this is no longer. So you're looking to supplement that grant, actually find investors or companies, corporations, because inputs, though, seed, fertilizer, those are all really good companies to attract to a project like this.
That's right. So I want to give special thanks to Rotary and the Rotary Foundation, and also Rotary District 6460, which is West Central Illinois. We are in that district. Most of the funding for these two projects, there was the initial vocational training team, and then there was the vocational training team extension. So basically 2 projects over the 4 years. And the majority of the funding came from District 6460. The Rotary Foundation, the actual grant was 40% foundation, 60% District 6460. Then there were 2 instances when, as the grant funds ran low, individual clubs and individuals actually donated directly for this project. And that money went through our Rotary District 6460 Foundation, which is separate from the Rotary Foundation. So again, it was district derived. So that's how the funding has taken place. It's just been through Rotary. But now, as we're moving to this new phase, there are some things that the Rotary Foundation will not fund. For example, buildings or land, things that a co-op business will need. But also, we're at the point where we're needing quite a bit more funding than what we have done in the past. The training is somewhat expensive, but when you start developing this business and trying to capitalize the business with inputs, because we would initially need to provide, the capital to purchase the fertilizer or to purchase the broilers, the chicks and the feed, and then that will then become profit as those are sold. So yes, we're going to go to approach corporations, possibly even U.S. government agencies, and really try to get more folks involved. And our district foundation is committed to this and will remain involved in it. But we are looking. Certainly, Rotarians are more than welcome, and clubs to continue donating as they have, because that's been great, and that's what has let this get started and get to the point where we are. Now we're at kind of a stepping off point to really grow this quite a lot larger.
Okay. How do people get a hold of you?
So the best way to get a hold of me would be through my telephone number, and send a text message, and that would be 217-242-1168. And send a text rather than call, because I won't recognize your number, and so I probably won't answer. But if you would do that, that would be one way. Another good way would be to send this to my email account, and that would be EDOLB, as in Bravo, EARE. So that's EDOLBEAR, that's my first initial and my complete last name, at Adams, ADAMS.net.
Okay, that's E as in Eric, Dolbear, DOLBEARE, at adams.net.
Right. And
okay.
in the subject line, put Zambia or something like that, so that I know, or Zambia Project. That way I would know what it is, and I'll try to key in on that. So that would be 2 ways to get hold of me.
Okay. Eric, keep up the good work with you and your team.
Thank you very much. We will.
Appreciate you coming in today. That is Eric Dolbear with us. He is team leader with the Rotary District 6460 training team for the Zambia Maize Improvement Project right here on WRAM.